The unexpected encounter. Mark's spaceship shuddered violently as alarms blared around him. He gripped the controls, trying to stabilize the small craft, but it was no use. A sudden meteor shower had sent him spiraling off course, and now he was hurtling toward an unknown planet. The last thing he remembered was a bright flash as the ship crashed through the atmosphere. When Mark woke up, he found himself lying in a dense, glowing forest. The plants here were strange, with neon leaves and vines that seemed to hum faintly. His ship was a smoking wreck nearby, half buried in the soft, blue soil. His head ached, and his suit's communicator was filled with static. "Great," Mark muttered. "Stranded. No signal. And probably no way back." He checked his supplies. Barely enough rations for a few days. If he didn't find help soon, things would get worse. Deciding to explore, he grabbed his toolkit and a flashlight, his heart pounding with uncertainty. As he ventured deeper into the forest, the air seemed to thrum with energy. The trees glowed brighter the further he went, lighting his path in eerie, otherworldly colors. He stumbled upon a narrow trail and followed it, hoping it might lead to signs of life, or at least something useful. After an hour, the trail opened into a large clearing. In the center stood a massive stone structure, covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with light. It looked ancient, like a temple or a shrine. A faint hum filled the air, growing louder as Mark stepped closer. "This must be some kind of alien tech," Mark whispered to himself. His engineer's curiosity took over, and he approached the structure cautiously. The hum grew louder, and he noticed a panel on the side with glowing, unfamiliar markings. Maybe it's a control panel, Mark thought. His fingers itched to investigate. Against his better judgment, he pulled out a scanner from his toolkit and aimed it at the symbols. The device beeped, and the markings lit up brightly. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath him. A beam of light shot out from the top of the structure, illuminating the night sky. Mark stumbled back, panic rising. "What did I just do?" he muttered. The beam of light faded, and silence returned. For a moment, Mark thought it was over. But then, a low rumble echoed across the clearing. From the shadows, figures began to emerge. They were tall, sleek, and covered in shimmering armor. Their eyes glowed faintly, and they carried strange weapons. Before Mark could react, one of the figures stepped forward. She was taller than the rest, her presence commanding. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, and her eyes gleamed like molten gold. She wore an ornate crown-like headpiece that marked her as someone important. The guards immediately bowed to her. Mark froze as the alien woman studied him. Her gaze was sharp, piercing, as if she could see right through him. Then, to his shock, she spoke in a voice that was both melodic and intimidating. "You have activated the ancient bond ceremony," she said, her voice echoing in the clearing. "By our laws, this act is a proposal of union." Mark blinked, trying to process her words. "Proposal? Wait, what? No, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to." The alien queen raised a hand, silencing him. "Silence, human. You have performed the rite. By our tradition, you are now my chosen one, my fiancé." Mark's jaw dropped. "Fiancé? What are you talking about? I didn't mean to." The guards moved closer, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. Mark raised his hands in surrender, his heart racing. Okay. Let's not do anything crazy here." The queen studied him again, her expression unreadable. Then she gestured to her guards. "Take him to the palace. He will be prepared for the formal ceremony." Before Mark could protest, the guards grabbed his arms and led him away. He was too stunned to fight back, his mind racing. What just happened? How had he gone from crashing his ship to being dragged off as the fiancé of an alien queen? As they marched through the forest, Mark couldn't help but notice how the queen's people seemed to treat her with reverence. Even the trees seemed to bow slightly in her presence. She was clearly powerful, and he was clearly in over his head. They reached a massive palace carved into the side of a glowing mountain. The structure was breathtaking, with towers that seemed to touch the stars. Mark couldn't decide whether to be amazed or terrified. The guards led him into a grand hall filled with more aliens, all of whom turned to stare at him. Whispers filled the room, and Mark felt his face flush. He was just a simple engineer. How had he ended up in this mess? The Queen addressed the crowd, her voice ringing out. "This human has performed the ancient bond ceremony. He is now my chosen one. Prepare for the union." The hall erupted in cheers and applause, but Mark felt like the ground might swallow him whole. This was not how he imagined his day going. As the Queen turned to leave, she glanced back at him. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held a strange intensity. "Do not disappoint me, human," she said softly. Mark gulped. Disappoint her? He wasn't even sure how to survive this. All he knew was that he had to find a way to fix this mistake before it was too late. The doors closed behind him, and Mark was left alone in a lavish room, his mind spinning. Little did he know, his adventure was only just beginning. Alien traditions and trouble. Mark sat in a grand, glowing chamber, the walls shimmering with alien symbols that seemed to hum with energy. He tried to stay calm, but his heart pounded as he looked around. The palace was unlike anything he had ever seen, both beautiful and intimidating. The alien queen, Cirilla, sat on her throne at the far end of the room, her golden eyes locked onto him, assessing him like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. The silence was broken when one of her advisors, a thin, sharp-featured alien with green-tinted skin, stepped forward. "Your Majesty," the advisor said in a low, melodic voice, "as tradition demands, the chosen one must complete the rite of acceptance to confirm the union." Mark blinked. Rite of what now? Cirilla's gaze softened just slightly, though her tone remained firm. "The rite of acceptance is a sacred tradition. You must prove your worth to be my chosen one. It is customary." Mark swallowed hard. "Prove my worth? Look, I'm just a guy who pressed the wrong button. This is all a big misunderstanding. Can't we just, call it off?" The room fell deathly silent. Every alien in the chamber turned to stare at him, as if he'd just suggested something unthinkable. Cirilla's golden eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Mark thought he might have just doomed himself. "To reject the bond is to reject our ways," Cirilla said, her voice low but filled with authority. "It would bring shame upon me and my people. Do you wish to insult the Queen of Zarathis?" Mark raised his hands in surrender. "No, no insult intended. Can we maybe discuss this?" Cirilla rose from her throne, her towering presence casting a shadow over him. "There is nothing to discuss. You performed the ritual. You are bound to me now. However," she paused, her gaze softening slightly, "if you complete the rite, you may earn the right to request freedom from the bond." Mark's mind raced. It wasn't exactly a get-out-of-jail-free card, but it was better than nothing. "All right," he said reluctantly. "What's this rite of acceptance?" The advisor smirked, clearly enjoying Mark's discomfort. "The rite involves facing 3 trials. The first trial is of wisdom, the second of courage, and the third," he paused for dramatic effect, "the trial of unity." Mark frowned. That doesn't sound too bad. The advisor's smirk deepened. "We shall see." Before Mark could ask what that meant, Cirilla waved her hand, and the room was suddenly filled with a strange, electric energy. The floor beneath him began to shift, and glowing symbols appeared, forming a spiral path. The walls shimmered and dissolved, revealing a vast chamber filled with holographic projections of alien landscapes. "This is the Chamber of Trials," Cirilla said, her voice echoing. "Your first task is to navigate the maze of wisdom. Within lies an artifact, a crystal key. Find it and return here before the sands run out." Mark glanced at the hourglass that appeared in midair, its glowing grains already beginning to fall. He let out a shaky breath. "No pressure, right?" The maze shimmered, its pathways shifting and rearranging before his eyes. As the floor stopped moving, a path opened in front of him. Zarila gestured toward it. "Go." Mark stepped forward cautiously, the glowing symbols beneath his feet lighting the way. The maze walls seemed to pulse, alive and ever-changing. He quickly realized the path wasn't straightforward. Every time he hesitated, the walls shifted, closing off one route and opening another. "Okay, think, Mark," he muttered. "It's a test of wisdom, so there's got to be some logic to this." As he moved deeper into the maze, holographic creatures appeared, ghostly figures that asked him riddles in Cirilla's language. Mark didn't understand a word, but the symbols on the walls seemed to shift in response to the questions. Using his engineering instincts, he noticed patterns in the symbols and managed to answer the riddles by touching the correct glowing runes. The deeper he went, the harder the challenges became. One wrong move caused a section of the floor to collapse, forcing him to leap to safety. Another path was blocked by an energy barrier, which he managed to disable by tinkering with a hidden control panel. Finally, after what felt like hours, Mark stumbled into a circular chamber at the center of the maze. A crystalline pedestal stood in the middle, holding the key Cirilla had mentioned. It glowed softly, casting a gentle light across the room. Mark approached cautiously, half expecting a trap. When nothing happened, he grabbed the key and turned to leave. As soon as he did, the maze began to collapse. Walls crumbled, pathways disappeared, and the hum of energy grew deafening. "Of course," Mark groaned. "Why does it always have to be a trap?" He sprinted back the way he came, the crystal key clutched tightly in his hand. The shifting walls and falling debris made it nearly impossible to find his way, but he relied on his memory and instincts to navigate the chaos. Finally, Mark burst out of the maze and into the main chamber, panting and covered in sweat. He held up the key triumphantly, just as the last grain of sand fell in the hourglass. Cirilla stepped forward, her expression unreadable. She took the key from his hand and examined it before nodding. "You have completed the first trial." Mark let out a relieved laugh. "Great. What's next?" Before Cirilla could answer, the sound of an explosion echoed through the palace. The room shook, and the doors burst open. A group of armed rebels stormed in, their weapons trained on Cirilla. "Your reign ends here, Queen Cirilla," their leader growled, "and your human pet won't save you." Mark's relief vanished as he realized his troubles were far from over. The rebel threat. The palace trembled under the force of the explosion. Mark barely had time to process what was happening before alien guards rushed into the chamber, their weapons drawn. Cirilla, calm yet commanding, stood tall on her throne, her golden eyes narrowing as the sound of heavy boots echoed through the grand hall. A group of rebels stormed in, their leader at the front. He was a hulking alien with dark, jagged armor and a scar running down one side of his face. His red eyes burned with hatred as he pointed a weapon at Cirilla. "Your time is over, Queen Cirilla," the leader growled, his voice echoing in the hall. "Your alliance with this outsider is the final insult to our people." Mark blinked. "Wait, what? I'm not an ally. This is all a misunderstanding." The leader sneered at him. "Silence, human. You're nothing but a pawn in her game." Cirilla stepped forward, her voice cold and sharp. "Zoreth, your rebellion is nothing more than a desperate attempt to cling to the past. Lay down your weapons and surrender. This is your only chance." Zoreth laughed darkly. "Surrender? To a queen who would bind herself to a weakling like this human? Never." Before Cirilla could respond, Zoreth raised his weapon, a strange device that pulsed with dark energy. The guards reacted instantly, raising their shields to form a protective barrier around Cirilla. Mark ducked behind a nearby pillar, his heart racing. The room erupted into chaos as the rebels opened fire. Blasts of energy flew in every direction, and the shimmering walls of the palace seemed to ripple under the onslaught. Cirilla shouted commands to her guards, who returned fire with precise, disciplined shots. Mark peeked out from his hiding spot, his mind racing. He was no soldier, but he couldn't just sit there. His eyes scanned the room, searching for something, anything, that could help. That's when he noticed the energy conduits running along the walls. The rebels had entered through a side door, and their position was dangerously close to one of the conduits. If he could disable it, he might be able to cut off their power supply or create a distraction. Think, Mark, think, he muttered to himself, pulling out his toolkit. Crawling along the floor to avoid the chaos, he reached the conduit and opened a small panel. The alien technology was unfamiliar, but he recognized enough to make an educated guess. He rewired a few circuits and set a timed overload. As he worked, he couldn't help but overhear Xarilla and Zoreth's heated exchange amidst the battle. "You claim to fight for our people, but you endanger them with your reckless actions," Xarilla shouted, deflecting a blast with a shimmering shield. "Our people deserve a leader who upholds tradition, not one who defiles it with foreign alliances," Zoreth roared back. Mark finished his adjustments and ducked back behind the pillar. "All right, here goes nothing," he whispered, pressing a button on his device. A moment later, the conduit sparked and erupted in a bright explosion, sending a shockwave through the chamber. The rebels near it were thrown off balance, and the sudden blast created a moment of confusion. "Now's your chance," Mark shouted, gesturing to Xarilla. Taking advantage of the distraction, Xarilla commanded her guards to press forward. The tide of the battle began to shift, with the rebels retreating toward the exit. Zoreth growled in frustration, his red eyes locking onto Mark. "You," he snarled, raising his weapon. "You dare interfere?" Mark froze as Zoreth fired, the dark energy blast hurtling toward him. But before it could reach him, Xarilla stepped in, her shield absorbing the impact. The force of the blast sent her stumbling, but she quickly regained her footing. "Enough, Zoreth," she said, her voice cold as steel. "You've lost." Zoreth snarled but signaled his remaining forces to retreat. "This isn't over, Xarilla," he spat. "You and your human pet will regret this." As the rebels disappeared into the shadows, Mark collapsed against the pillar, his hands shaking. Xarilla approached him, her expression unreadable. "You acted bravely," she said. "Perhaps you are not as weak as you seem." Mark let out a nervous laugh. "Brave? I was just trying not to die." Xarilla's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Regardless, you have proven resourceful. That will serve you well in the trials to come." Mark frowned. "Trials? You mean this isn't over?" Xarilla turned, her golden eyes glinting. "The rebels will return, stronger and more determined. They see you as a symbol of everything they oppose. If you wish to survive, you must be prepared." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. No pressure." As the Queen's guards secured the palace and assessed the damage, Mark realized he was deeper in this mess than he had ever imagined. And somewhere in the shadows, Zoreth was plotting his next move. Mark had just saved the Queen, but it felt like his troubles were only beginning. Bonding with the Queen. The silence of Xarilla's private chamber was unsettling. Mark sat on a low, intricately carved seat, watching the Queen as she studied a holographic map floating in the air. The glowing lines shifted and pulsed, showing what looked like troop movements and supply routes. Xarilla's golden eyes flicked over the projections with a focus that made Mark feel small and out of place. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "So, what's the plan now? More rebels? Another trial? Or are you just going to glare at maps until something magical happens?" Xarilla's gaze snapped to him, and for a moment, Mark thought he might have overstepped. But instead of scolding him, she let out a soft, almost amused sigh. "You have a habit of speaking when silence would be wiser, human." Mark shrugged. "It's how I cope. You know, with the whole accidental fiancé to an alien queen thing." Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile. "Almost." She gestured toward the map, and the glowing lines shifted, forming a three-dimensional rendering of the palace. The rebels are more organized than I anticipated. Their attack exposed vulnerabilities in our defenses. Yeah, I noticed, Mark said. Big explosions tend to be a clue. Cirilla ignored his sarcasm and continued. You have a unique mind, Mark. Your actions during the attack prove that you see things others do not. If you are to remain here, I will need your assistance. Mark blinked. Wait. Are you asking for my help? Like officially? Cirilla tilted her head, her crown glinting in the soft light. Do not mistake necessity for flattery. You are still untrained, inexperienced, and overly fond of reckless humor. Gee, thanks, Mark muttered. But, Cirilla added, you have a talent for improvisation. That talent may be our advantage against Zoreth. Mark leaned back, crossing his arms. So, what's the job? Fix your defenses. Invent some superweapon. Or are we talking more ceremonial duties, like alien wedding planning? This time, Cirilla did smile. It was faint, but it was there. A combination of both, perhaps. Mark opened his mouth to reply. But before he could, the holographic map shifted again, displaying a cluster of glowing red dots outside the palace's borders. Cirilla's expression darkened. The rebels are regrouping, she said. They're gathering at the edge of the Nebris Rift. It's a barren region, but it offers a direct path to our energy grid. Mark frowned. Energy grid? You mean the thing that powers this entire place? Yes, Cirilla replied. If they reach it, they could cripple the palace and the city. We must strengthen our defenses before they strike again. Mark stood, his mind racing. All right, show me what you've got in place already. Shields, weapons, sensors, whatever tech you're working with. Cirilla raised an eyebrow. You seem eager. Mark shrugged. Look, I may not be a warrior, but I'm an engineer. If there's one thing I know how to do, it's fix things. And right now, it sounds like your defenses could use a little human ingenuity. For the next several hours, Mark and Cirilla worked together, reviewing the palace's defense systems. Mark marveled at the advanced alien technology, but he also noticed flaws, blind spots in the sensor array, weak points in the shield generators, and inefficiencies in the energy distribution network. You rely too much on tradition, Mark said as he tinkered with one of the consoles. This tech is amazing, but it's outdated. You've been using the same systems for centuries, haven't you? Cirilla's gaze was sharp. Tradition is the foundation of our society. It is what unites my people. Yeah, well, tradition won't stop a rebel with a blaster, Mark replied. You need to adapt, evolve. For a moment, Cirilla said nothing. Then she stepped closer, watching as Mark rewired a circuit. You speak as though you know what is best for my people. Mark glanced at her, his expression serious. I don't, but I know what it's like to be stuck in the past. Back on Earth, I used to work for a company that clung to old ways because they were afraid of change. They fell behind, and we all paid the price. Cirilla studied him, her golden eyes searching his face. You are surprising, Mark. Yeah, I get that a lot, he said with a small grin. By the time they finished, the palace's defenses were stronger than ever. Mark had even devised a new sensor array that could detect energy signatures from miles away. Cirilla seemed impressed, though she didn't say so outright. As they stood on one of the palace's balconies, overlooking the glowing city below, Mark felt a strange sense of accomplishment. Despite everything, he was starting to feel like he belonged, at least a little. You have done well, Cirilla said quietly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Perhaps there is more to you than I first believed. Mark smirked. Careful, Cirilla. That almost sounded like a compliment. She turned to him, her expression soft but serious. Do not let it go to your head, human. There is still much to do. Before Mark could respond, a distant rumble echoed through the air. Cirilla's communicator chimed, and one of her advisors appeared as a hologram. "Your Majesty," the advisor said, his voice urgent. "The rebels have launched an assault on the outer city. They've deployed a new weapon, one we've never seen before." Mark's stomach sank. "Guess the honeymoon's over," he muttered. Zarilla's gaze hardened. "Prepare yourself, Mark. The real battle begins now." A dangerous choice. The palace shook as distant explosions lit up the horizon. Mark stood at a high window, watching trails of fire streak through the alien sky. Below, Zarilla's guards scrambled to prepare defenses, their shimmering armor glowing faintly under the palace lights. "You hear that?" Mark said, glancing back at Zarilla. "That's the sound of me regretting all my life choices." Zarilla didn't respond. She stood at the center of the room, speaking in rapid Zarathian to her advisors through a holographic projection. Her expression was calm, but Mark could see the tension in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened slightly at her sides. The advisor's voice cut through the static. "The rebels are moving fast, Your Majesty. They've deployed a mobile disruptor. It's destabilizing our energy grid and rendering our shields ineffective." Mark frowned. "A disruptor? Like an EMP?" Zarilla turned to him, her golden eyes sharp. "Similar, but far more advanced. It emits a continuous wave that interferes with our energy systems. If they bring it closer, it will disable the palace entirely." "Okay, so blow it up," Mark said, as if the solution were obvious. Zarilla's gaze darkened. "It is heavily guarded, and its energy field makes it impervious to direct attack. We must neutralize it from within." Mark crossed his arms. "And by we, you mean me?" Zarilla raised an eyebrow. "You are resourceful. You understand technology in ways my people do not. If anyone can find a way to disable it, it is you." Mark opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She wasn't wrong, but the idea of running straight into the rebels' camp to tamper with their super weapon wasn't exactly his definition of a good time. "I'll do it," he said finally, "but I'm going to need help. Someone who knows their way around this planet. And some actual weapons would be nice." Zarilla nodded, her expression softening slightly. "You will not go alone. My most trusted guard, Lirak, will accompany you." As if summoned, Lirak stepped into the room. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his violet skin gleaming under the light. His sharp eyes appraised Mark critically, as if trying to decide if he was worth protecting. "This is the human?" Lirak asked, his tone skeptical. "Yeah, nice to meet you too," Mark said, offering a half-hearted wave. "Do not underestimate him, Lirak," Zarilla said firmly. "He has proven himself before, and he will do so again." Lirak didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "As you command, Your Majesty." Moments later, Mark found himself in a sleek transport vehicle, speeding toward the rebels' position with Lirak at his side. The guard was silent, his focus on the horizon. Mark, meanwhile, was trying to steady his nerves. "So," Mark said, breaking the silence, "you're Zarilla's best, huh? Got any tips for not dying out there?" Lirak glanced at him. "Stay out of my way." "Great. Love the team spirit," Mark muttered. The transport slowed as they approached the Nibris Rift, a barren wasteland dotted with jagged rocks and glowing fissures. In the distance, the disruptor loomed like a dark monolith, its energy field crackling with power. Rebel soldiers patrolled the area, their weapons gleaming under the faint light of the twin moons. Mark swallowed hard. "Okay, new plan. Let's turn around and pretend we didn't see anything." Lirak ignored him, scanning the area with a small device. "There's a weak point in their perimeter. We'll move through the western ridge and approach the disruptor from behind." Mark nodded, trying to suppress his growing panic. "Right. Sneak in, disable the superweapon, and get out. Easy." They moved quickly and quietly, weaving through the shadows of the rocky terrain. Mark's heart pounded as they passed dangerously close to a group of rebels, their voices low and tense. When they reached the disruptor, Mark's jaw dropped. Up close, the device was massive, its surface covered in intricate alien machinery that pulsed with an ominous red glow. "Can you disable it?" Lurak asked, his voice low. Mark pulled out his toolkit and studied the disruptor's controls. The interface was alien, but he could make out enough patterns to piece together its function. "I think so. Just keep them off me, okay?" Lurak grunted in response, his weapon ready. Mark worked quickly, his hands shaking as he rewired circuits and bypassed failsafes. Sweat dripped down his face as alarms began to blare. The rebels had noticed them. "They're coming," Lurak warned, stepping in front of Mark to block the incoming fire. "Just buy me a few more minutes," Mark shouted, his fingers flying over the controls. The disruptor's energy field crackled violently as Mark made his final adjustments. With a triumphant yell, he pulled the lever, and the device powered down. The field around it flickered and disappeared. "We're done. Let's go," Mark yelled. But as they turned to leave, a deafening roar filled the air. A massive rebel mech stomped into view, its cannons aimed directly at them. "Move," Lurak shouted, grabbing Mark and diving for cover as the mech fired. The blast shook the ground, sending debris flying. Mark groaned, pulling himself to his feet. "Any more bright ideas?" Lurak smirked, a rare glint of amusement in his eyes. "Just one. Run." As they sprinted back toward the transport, the mech's cannons fired again, narrowly missing them. Mark's heart pounded as he dove into the vehicle, Lurak right behind him. The transport roared to life, speeding away as the mech's shots echoed in the distance. When they finally reached the palace, Cirilla was waiting for them. Her golden eyes softened as she saw them, but her voice remained steady. "You succeeded." Mark nodded, still catching his breath. "Yeah, but they're not going to stop. That mech, it's just the beginning." Cirilla's expression hardened. "Then we must prepare for what comes next." And Mark. He looked up at her, his face tired but determined. "Yeah. You have done well," she said softly. "You may yet prove to be the hero we need." Mark let out a shaky laugh. No pressure, right? But even as he joked, he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. The hero's moment. The palace courtyard buzzed with tension as Cirilla's forces prepared for an inevitable attack. Mark stood among them, a strange mix of awe and anxiety bubbling in his chest. The Zarethians moved with precision, their sleek armor glinting under the alien sun. Yet, despite their calm exterior, Mark could feel the weight of the impending battle hanging over everyone. Cirilla approached, her golden eyes fixed on him. She wore a battle cloak over her ceremonial armor, and her presence was as commanding as ever. "The rebels will strike soon," she said, her voice steady. "Our scouts report they have deployed the war mech you encountered, along with an entire battalion." Mark nodded, his stomach churning. "And let me guess, they're not here for tea and biscuits." Cirilla tilted her head, her lips curving in the faintest trace of a smile. "Indeed not. Their leader, Zoreth, seeks to end this conflict by taking the palace and eliminating us both." "Right, because that's just what I needed today," Mark muttered, running a hand through his hair. "So what's the plan?" Cirilla gestured to a holographic map hovering nearby. "We've fortified the palace, but the mech's energy cannon is powerful enough to breach our walls. We need a way to neutralize it before it reaches us." Mark studied the map, his mind racing. "What about a diversion? Something to draw their fire while we take out the mech?" Cirilla's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. A bold move. But who would lead such a dangerous task? Mark hesitated, the weight of the question pressing on him. He wasn't a soldier. He was just an engineer, a guy who'd stumbled into this mess by accident. But he also knew the rebels wouldn't stop until they'd destroyed everything. If he didn't step up now, there might not be a palace, or a queen, left to save. "I'll do it," he said finally, surprising even himself. Cirilla's gaze softened, a rare moment of vulnerability flickering across her face. "You would risk your life for my people." Mark shrugged, forcing a small smile. "Well, someone's got to do it. Besides, I've already survived a crashed ship, a rebel ambush, and a collapsing maze. What's one more near-death experience?" Zarilla placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch firm but gentle. "You are braver than you realize, Mark. May the stars guide you." Hours later, Mark found himself crouched behind a rocky outcrop at the edge of the palace's defensive perimeter. Lyrak was beside him, his weapon at the ready. The two of them were the heart of the diversion, tasked with drawing the mech's fire away from the palace, while Zarilla's forces prepared to strike. Mark adjusted the makeshift energy beacon he'd rigged from Palace Tech, the device emitting a signal designed to mimic the palace's energy signature. If everything went according to plan, the mech would target the beacon instead of the walls. "Let's hope this works," Mark muttered, his hands trembling slightly as he activated the beacon. Lyrak smirked. "If it doesn't, you won't have long to regret it." "Comforting," Mark replied dryly. The ground began to shake as the mech emerged from the horizon, its massive form casting a long shadow over the rocky landscape. Its cannons hummed ominously, the sound vibrating through Mark's chest. Rebel soldiers flanked the machine, their weapons at the ready. Mark's heart pounded as he saw the mech's cannon swivel toward the beacon. The device sparked and emitted a bright pulse, drawing the machine's attention. "It's working," he whispered. But then, just as the mech fired, one of the rebels pointed in their direction. There, behind the rocks, the mech's massive frame turned, its cannons now aimed squarely at Mark and Lyrak. "Great. They're onto us," Mark said, scrambling to his feet. "Time for Plan B." Lyrak raised an eyebrow. "Plan B?" "Run," Mark shouted, sprinting toward a nearby ravine as the mech's cannons roared to life. Energy blasts rained down around them, the ground erupting in flashes of light and heat. Mark stumbled, narrowly avoiding a direct hit, while Lyrak returned fire, his weapon crackling with plasma bolts. "This was your plan?" Lyrak shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "It's a work in progress," Mark yelled back. As they reached the ravine, Mark spotted an outcropping of jagged rocks above. An idea sparked in his mind. Desperate, but it might just work. "Lyrak, cover me," he called, scrambling up the rocks. The Zarathian guard didn't hesitate, firing at the rebels to keep them at bay. Mark reached the top and quickly scanned the mech. Its energy core was exposed on its underside, a design flaw he hadn't noticed before. If he could hit it with enough force, he might be able to disable the machine. Grabbing a small energy grenade from his belt, a parting gift from Zarilla, Mark took a deep breath. "Okay, don't screw this up," he muttered, pulling the pin. He leaped from the outcropping, landing on the mech's massive frame. The machine jolted beneath him, its cannon swiveling wildly as it tried to shake him off. Clinging to a metal ridge, Mark crawled toward the energy core, the grenade clutched tightly in his hand. "Mark!" Lyrak shouted from below. "Hurry!" The mech's cannons fired again, narrowly missing the palace walls. Mark gritted his teeth, his fingers fumbling as he activated the grenade's timer. He jammed the device into a crack near the energy core, and then pushed off, tumbling to the ground as the grenade detonated. The explosion rocked the mech, its core sparking violently before the entire machine collapsed in a heap of metal and smoke. The rebels froze, their morale shattered as their greatest weapon fell. Mark groaned, pulling himself to his feet. His entire body ached, but he was alive. Lyrak rushed to his side, his expression a mix of relief and respect. "You actually did it." "Yeah," Mark said, coughing. "Let's not make this a habit." As the remaining rebels retreated, Zarilla and her forces arrived to secure the battlefield. The queen approached Mark, her golden eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "You have done more than I ever expected," she said softly. "You are no longer just my chosen one, Mark. You are a hero to my people." Mark smiled weakly. I'll take the promotion. But can I get a break now? Cirilla laughed, a sound that surprised both of them. Perhaps. For now. But as Mark looked out at the smoldering battlefield, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far bigger. The final stand. The battlefield lay silent under the eerie glow of Zereth's twin moons. The shattered remains of the rebel mech smoldered in the distance, its defeat a brief victory. Mark leaned against a battered supply crate, his breaths coming in ragged gasps. Every muscle in his body ached. But he was alive. For now. Cirilla's golden eyes scanned the horizon as her forces regrouped. The queen stood tall, her battle cloak billowing in the wind, but Mark could see the strain in her posture. The rebels had been pushed back, but this wasn't over. Zoreth wasn't the kind of leader to accept defeat quietly. A messenger approached, his armor scorched and cracked. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply. "The rebels have fallen back to the Nibris Rift, but Zoreth himself leads the final wave. He's bringing the Voidbreaker." The name sent a chill through the crowd. Mark frowned. "Voidbreaker? That doesn't sound friendly." Cirilla turned to him, her expression grim. "It is an ancient weapon, capable of collapsing the very ground beneath us. If Zoreth activates it, the palace, and everyone in it, will be lost." Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. Of course he has a doomsday device. Why wouldn't he? Lyrak, standing nearby, stepped forward. "We should strike now, Your Majesty. Destroy the Voidbreaker before it reaches the palace." Cirilla nodded, her gaze firm. "Agreed. But this is no ordinary battle. We will need a strategy." Mark straightened, despite the exhaustion weighing him down. "I think I've got an idea. It's risky, but it might just work." Cirilla raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Mark knelt by a holographic map, pointing to the narrow canyon leading to the palace. "The Voidbreaker is big, right? That means it has to pass through here. If we can funnel it into the canyon, we can trap it. But we'll need to create a massive chain reaction to destroy it." Lyrak frowned. "And how do you propose we do that?" Mark smirked, though his confidence was more bravado than certainty. "Let's just say I've learned a thing or two about alien tech recently. If we overload the palace's energy grid, we can direct the surge into the canyon. It'll cause a blast big enough to take out the Voidbreaker." Cirilla studied him, her expression unreadable. "You realize the risk, don't you? If the timing is even slightly off, the palace itself could be destroyed." Mark shrugged. "Yeah, well, high stakes seem to be the theme of my life these days." The queen's gaze softened, just enough for Mark to notice. "Very well. I trust you." The words hit Mark harder than he expected. Trust. He hadn't heard that in a while. The plan unfolded in a flurry of preparation. Cirilla's forces set up barriers and concentrated their firepower along the canyon's entrance, while Mark worked feverishly to reroute the palace's energy grid. Every second felt like an hour, the weight of the mission pressing down on him. Finally, the Voidbreaker appeared on the horizon, a massive lumbering machine that radiated dark energy. Zoreth stood atop it, his scared face lit by the glow of its core. His voice boomed across the battlefield. "Queen Cirilla," he roared, "you think your tricks can stop me? Surrender now, and I may spare your people." Cirilla stepped forward, her voice carrying a regal defiance. "You speak of mercy, Zoreth, but all you bring is destruction. This ends here." With that, the Zerethian forces unleashed a barrage of firepower, targeting the Voidbreaker's legs. The machine shuddered but kept moving, its massive cannons returning fire. Explosions shook the ground as the rebels pushed forward. Mark, crouched behind a console near the canyon's edge, activated his makeshift energy conduit. Sparks flew as the grid powered up, the surging energy casting a bluish glow over the battlefield. "Almost there," he shouted into his communicator. The Voidbreaker reached the canyon, its bulk squeezing into the narrow pass. "Now, Cirilla commanded, her forces pulling back to avoid the blast zone. Mark hit the final switch, redirecting the energy surge into the canyon. The ground trembled as the power built up, a blinding light erupting from the conduits. But then, something went wrong. The Voidbreaker's core began to absorb the energy instead of collapsing. Mark. Cirilla's voice crackled through his communicator. What's happening? Mark's heart raced as he realized the flaw in his plan. It's drawing power from the surge. I need to shut it down manually. Before Cirilla could respond, Mark sprinted toward the Voidbreaker, his legs burning with effort. Lyrek appeared at his side, his weapon blazing as he cleared a path. You're insane, human, Lyrek growled. Yeah, well, it's a living, Mark shot back. They reached the base of the Voidbreaker, its energy core pulsing dangerously. Mark scrambled onto the machine, his toolkit in hand. He bypassed a series of panels, his hands moving faster than his thoughts. The Voidbreaker shuddered violently, its systems fighting against him. Almost. There, Mark muttered, sweat dripping into his eyes. Zorath appeared above him, his weapon drawn. You, he snarled. You dare defy me. Mark didn't think, he just acted. Grabbing a nearby energy rod, he jammed it into the Voidbreaker's core. The machine screamed, its systems overloading in a cascade of sparks. Zorath lunged, but before he could reach Mark, Cirilla appeared, her blade shimmering with light. She blocked his strike with a precision that took even Zorath by surprise. Your reign of terror ends now, she said coldly. Mark jumped clear of the Voidbreaker as the core finally collapsed. A massive explosion tore through the canyon, the shockwave knocking everyone off their feet. When the dust settled, the Voidbreaker was nothing more than twisted metal, and Zorath lay defeated at Cirilla's feet. Cirilla extended a hand to Mark, helping him to his feet. Her golden eyes held a warmth he hadn't seen before. You've done it, Mark. You've saved us. Mark chuckled weakly. Yeah, well, let's not make this a regular thing, okay? The Queen smiled. A real, genuine smile. Perhaps, but you've proven yourself to be more than just my chosen one. You are a hero to my people. As the Zerathians cheered, Mark looked out at the stars above. He still didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he had found a place where he truly belonged.